Princess Solara had grown up in a world of impossible beauty. Her home planet was a place of shimmering skies and magnificent towers that rose high above the clouds, their glowing structures touching the heavens. As the only daughter of the Grand Ruler, she had lived surrounded by comfort, music, and endless luxury. But beneath all that beauty, Solara carried a quiet fear. From the earliest days of her childhood, she had been told stories about a mysterious race known as humans. The stories were always the same: dark, terrifying, unforgiving. The elders described humans as a species that fought without mercy, warriors who burned entire worlds and showed no compassion to those who stood against them. They spoke of them like monsters, wearing the shape of people, like shadows given flesh. Young Solara would listen with wide eyes, holding tightly onto her blankets, as those terrifying images filled her imagination. For years, she never questioned the stories. Why would she? The voices of her elders were the only truth she knew. Whenever someone mentioned humans, she imagined cold faces, emotionless eyes, and hearts made of stone. She believed they were creatures who only conquered, only destroyed, and only took from others. A race incapable of kindness. A race without love. But Solara did not know the truth. She did not know that the stories she had heard were only one side of a much larger history. And soon, she would meet a human who would challenge everything she believed. In her imagination, they were monsters disguised as people. It became a silent fear that grew with her, something she never dared to speak of, but always felt inside her chest. Then came the announcement that shook her peaceful life. Her father, the emperor of their vast galaxy, declared that Solara was to be married. The marriage was not a choice of love, not the sweet kind of story had dreamed about as a child. Instead, it was a bond of politics, a bridge to secure peace between her people and the humans. She was to marry the son of the human leader, a man called Commander Adrian. When she first heard his name, it sounded heavy in her ears. The advisors described him as strong, cunning, and undefeated in battle. They said his enemies called him ruthless. That word ruthless stuck in her heart like a thorn. It was the very word used in her childhood stories. The word that carried all her fears. Solara could not stop thinking of it. If he was ruthless, what kind of life awaited her? The night after the announcement, she sat alone on her balcony, staring at the stars. Her world glittered with thousands of moons and floating lights, but her eyes were clouded with tears. She thought of leaving her home, her family, her gentle gardens, and her mother's comforting voice. She thought of stepping into a strange world with a man she had never seen, one who was said to be merciless. Her heart trembled as she whispered to herself, "Is this my fate? To belong to someone who does not know kindness?" In the grand palace, whispers followed her everywhere. Servants bowed and smiled, but Solara could sense their pity. Many spoke behind closed doors, wondering if their princess was walking into a cage. Some believed the marriage would save the galaxy, while others worried it would break her spirit. Every whisper only deepened her fear. Her father, though wise and powerful, offered no comfort beyond duty. "You are the hope of our people," he told her in his firm voice. "This marriage is not for you alone, but for every soul who looks to us for protection. We cannot afford war. Peace demands sacrifice, and you are that sacrifice." His words, though heavy with meaning, felt like chains wrapping around her. She wanted to be brave, but she was still a daughter, still a young woman who longed for safety and love. In the quiet of her chambers, Solara tried to imagine her future. Would she live in fear every day? Would she become a wife who was silenced, who lived under harsh command? She pictured Adrian's face as cruel, his eyes cold, his voice sharp. She had never seen him, yet her mind painted him as the very villain from her childhood nightmares. Every thought made her chest tighten until she could hardly breathe. One evening, her closest maid, Leora, tried to comfort her. "Princess," Leora said softly, brushing Solara's long silver hair, "not all stories are true. Perhaps he is different from what you imagine." But Sarah shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "They call him ruthless, Leora. How can I believe he is kind when his name carries such a shadow?" Leora sighed, wishing she could give her princess certainty, but she had no answers. The days moved quickly, as if time itself was eager to push her into the unknown. Dresses were prepared, jewels polished, and songs rehearsed for the marriage ceremony. To everyone else, it was a celebration, a moment of history that would unite two galaxies. But to Sarah, it felt like a farewell to freedom. Each smile offered by the palace people felt heavy, as if they were saying goodbye to the girl she had been, knowing she was about to be given away. As the day of her departure drew near, Solara found herself spending long hours in the gardens of her childhood. She walked among the glowing flowers, touching their soft petals, memorizing every color, every fragrance, as if she feared she would never see them again. She pressed her hand to the tall crystal trees and whispered promises to remember them always. Each step was a farewell, and each moment made her heart ache. She often looked at the horizon where the stars met the sky, wondering about the man waiting for her. Who was Adrian beyond the name? Was he truly the ruthless warrior she imagined, or was there something hidden behind the stories? Solara wanted to believe in hope, but fear was stronger. It wrapped around her like an unshakable shadow. On the final night before her journey, Solara stood by her window, watching the galaxies glitter in the distance. The thought of marriage did not bring joy, only trembling uncertainty. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer, not for herself, but for courage. Courage to face the unknown, courage to survive whatever awaited her. Her heart was heavy, but she knew there was no escape. She was the princess of her people, bound to duty. Tomorrow, she would step into the arms of the so-called ruthless human, and in her heart, she believed her life was about to be stolen away. The morning of her departure arrived with the sound of drums echoing across the palace halls. The sun of Solara's world rose slowly, spreading golden light over the crystal towers. Everything looked bright and grand, but inside Solara's heart, the light felt dim. She sat quietly in her chamber, as servants wrapped her in long robes stitched with silver threads, their hands careful but swift. Each movement reminded her that she was no longer just a daughter of her father's house. She was now a symbol, a bridge between two worlds. Her reflection in the mirror showed a princess who looked strong, but Solara knew her eyes gave her way. They were heavy with worry. Holding a quiet storm, she tried hard to hide. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run out into the gardens and refuse to leave. But her duty chained her still. She remembered her father's words, "Peace demands sacrifice." Every time she recalled them, her throat tightened. As she walked through the corridors on her way to the great hall, her people bowed their heads. Their eyes followed her with both pride and pity. Some whispered blessings under their breath, while others could not meet her gaze at all. Solara could hear the mixture of hope and fear in their silence. To them, she was more than a girl. She was the future. The Grand Council stood waiting in the hall, their robes trailing like waves behind them. One advisor stepped forward, his voice calm yet stern. "Princess Solara, today you carry the weight of our stars. This bond will protect our people from endless war. You must hold yourself with honor." Solara lowered her head, but inside she felt like a bird caught in a cage. She wanted to ask, "And who will protect me?" But the words never left her lips. She knew there would be no answer. When her ship rose into the sky, leaving behind the palace she had always called home, Solara pressed her hand against the glass window. The gardens shrank until they became a blur of color, and the towers turned into shining specks against the horizon. It felt like watching her own childhood fade into distance. She whispered softly, "Goodbye," her voice breaking. The journey across the galaxies was long, but every moment of it felt shorter than Solara wished. Advisors traveled with her, reminding her of her duty again and again. They spoke of the treaty, of the importance of trust, of the need to smile when she saw Adrian, no matter how much fear she carried. "Show no weakness," one elder said firmly. "Humans respect only strength." Those words struck Solara's heart with coldness. If strength was the only thing Adrian respected, then what place did her gentleness have in his world? Her nights in the ship were filled with restless dreams. She dreamed of tall figures with piercing eyes, their voices sharp, their hands unkind. She dreamed of standing in a foreign palace, where every face looked at her as if she were prey. She woke often, clutching her blankets, her heart pounding in the silence of her chamber. When she asked one of her guards about Adrian, the man's answer did not calm her fears. "He is a man of victory," the guard said. "On the battlefield, he shows no mercy. His enemies fear him more than death." Solara froze. That was the same word again. No mercy. Ruthless. The image in her mind of Adrian grew darker, but she also noticed something strange. Whenever she asked those who had actually met Adrian, their answers were never the same. Some spoke of him as a man with iron in his heart, while others hesitated, almost as if they were unsure. One old councilwoman whispered, "Do not believe every tale. Ruthless in war does not always mean ruthless in life." Solara held on to those words like a fragile piece of hope, though her fear still outweighed them. As the ship neared the human galaxy, Sarah's anxiety only grew. She thought of her mother, who had kissed her forehead before she left. Her mother's eyes had been filled with tears, though she tried to hide them. Sarah remembered her soft voice, saying, "Be brave, my child. Sometimes the stories we are told hide the truth. See with your own eyes before you decide what to believe." Those words, gentle and kind, repeated in Solara's heart whenever the fear became too strong. At last, the ship slowed, and the windows revealed a new world. The human planet stretched below. Vast oceans, green lands, and cities shining with lights that looked like stars fallen to the ground. It was beautiful, but to Solara, it was strange and intimidating. This was the world where she would spend her life, a place where no familiar voice or song would comfort her. The closer they drew to the human capital, the more her heart raced. Her hands trembled in her lap, though she tried to steady them. She imagined Adrian waiting for her with cold eyes, already planning how to bend her to his will. The image made her breath quicken until her chest felt tight. Finally, the ship landed. The grand doors opened with a hiss, and Solara stepped forward, her gown flowing like water behind her. The sound of trumpets filled the air, and rows of human soldiers stood lined in armor, their faces stern and unreadable. The human people had gathered to watch, their curious eyes fixed on the alien princess who had come to marry their commander. Sarah's legs felt heavy as she walked down the steps. She kept her chin high, remembering the Eller's words, "Show no weakness," but inside, she felt like a fragile flower placed in a storm. Every step brought her closer to the moment she feared the most. The moment she would look into the eyes of the ruthless human who would become her husband. She had not seen him yet. He was waiting at the end of the long path beyond the soldiers, beyond the crowd. Solara's thoughts raced. What if he was as cruel as they said? What if his gaze pierced her like a blade? What if from the very first moment she knew her life would be nothing but silent suffering? Her heart pounded louder than the trumpets, louder than the voices of the crowd. Every beat echoed one thought: "This is the end of who I was. This is the beginning of what I must endure." Solara lifted her eyes to the horizon, bracing herself for the first sight of the man whose name had haunted her dreams. She did not know that the moment she saw him up close, her fears would begin to shift in ways she could never have imagined. The path stretched long before her, lined with banners fluttering in the wind. The colors of the human kingdom were bold and proud, red and gold shining against the blue sky. Princess Solara walked slowly, her every step echoing in her ears. The soldiers stood still like statues, their polished armor reflecting the light. The crowd watched in silence, some curious, some cautious, and some whispering among themselves. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, as though every breath she took was being measured at the end of the path he stood. Commander Adrian, the man she had feared for so long. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought the crowd might hear it. Her fingers clenched the folds of her gown as she lifted her eyes and looked at him for the first time. She expected a face carved in stone, harsh and cruel, with eyes that held no warmth. but what she saw startled her. Adrian was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with strength, but there was no cruelty in his expression. His eyes, sharp but calm, were not cold as she had imagined. They were steady, watching her, not with hunger or ownership, but with something else, curiosity, perhaps even respect. His face was strong, yes, but not monstrous. He looked human, in a way that unsettled her, because it did not match the terrifying image she had carried for years. For a moment, Solara forgot to breathe. She searched his gaze, waiting to see the ruthlessness she had been warned about. But instead, she found a quiet control, a man who knew power but did not flaunt it. Still, her fear did not vanish. Her heart was too used to it. She reminded herself not to trust too quickly, not to believe appearances. As she approached him, Adrian did not move until she stopped before him. Then, instead of reaching out to take her by the arm as she had feared, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. Solara blinked in surprise. She had expected commands, not courtesy. "Princess Solara," he said, his voice deep but calm, carrying no trace of mockery. "Welcome." The word was simple, yet it felt strange to her ears. Welcome, not possession, not claim. Welcome. She stood still, unsure of how to respond, her throat tightening. At last, she lowered her head politely, whispering, "Commander." Adrian studied her for a brief moment. His gaze was not invasive, not the heavy stare of a man who saw her as a prize, but the careful look of someone who wished to understand. Solara could not decide if this unsettled her more than if he had been cruel. Kindness, after all, could be a mask. The ceremony began with leaders of both worlds stepping forward to speak of unity and peace. Words of treaties, promises, and future hopes filled the air, but Solara barely heard them. Her mind was still caught on the way Adrian had bowed, on the way his voice had carried neither arrogance nor anger. When the vows were spoken, Sarah felt her chest tighten again. This was the moment her life would be tied to his. She recited her part with trembling lips, her voice soft but steady. Adrian's voice followed, firm and unwavering. Yet, when he looked at her as he spoke, his eyes softened for just a second. Solara noticed it, though she pretended not to. After the vows there was applause, a sound that filled the great hall and spilled into the streets outside. The two leaders clasped hands, the treaty sealed, and the people cheered for the promise of peace to the world. It was a celebration. To Solara, it was the beginning of a path she did not yet understand. Later, when the crowds had gone and the hall had grown quieter, Solara found herself walking beside Adrian for the first time without the noise of voices around them. She kept her gaze low, her steps careful. She did not know what to say. It was Adrian who broke the silence. "You are afraid," he said softly. Not as an accusation, but as a statement of truth. Solara stiffened. Her first instinct was to deny it, but her voice betrayed her. "Yes," she whispered, her fingers tightening against her gown. He stopped, walking, and turned to her. She dared to glance up, meeting his eyes again. To her surprise, there was no satisfaction in his gaze, no pride at seeing her fear. Instead, there was something she had never expected, understanding. "I do not wish for you to fear me," he said, his tone calm. "I know what others call me, ruthless, cold, but you should know those are words of war. In battle, mercy can cost lives. I have been called ruthless because I protect my people, but off the battlefield, I have no need for cruelty." Solara stared at him, unsure how to respond. His words did not match the image she had carried. Could it be true? Could the man feared across galaxies be gentle in life? She wanted to believe, but her fear built walls around her heart. Adrian seemed to sense her doubt. He did not press further, nor did he demand her trust. Instead, he simply added, "In time, I hope you will see me as I am, not as the stories say. I will not force you." Those last words struck her deeply. He would not force her. It was so different from what she expected, so opposite of the nightmares that had haunted her for months. She lowered her eyes again, her thoughts swirling. That night, in the chambers prepared for her, Solara sat by the window and stared at the strange sky of the human world. She thought of Adrian's face, his steady eyes, his calm voice. She thought of the way he had bowed, the way he had spoken gently instead of harshly. It unsettled her, but in a different way than before. Instead of terror, she now felt confusion. Who was this man really? Was he truly ruthless? Or had she been blinded by stories and fear? Her heart was still heavy, but a small spark had appeared. Inside it, a spark of curiosity, a question that had never been there before. For the first time since her journey began, Solara wondered if perhaps her fate was not as dark as she had believed. The days that followed felt like a strange dream for Princess Solara. She was now in the heart of the human kingdom, surrounded by walls and halls that were nothing like her own world. The palace was built from strong stone and golden pillars, its design bold and solid compared to the crystal towers of her home. Everywhere she turned, she saw new things: strange machines, human servants dressed in simple clothes, soldiers who bowed stiffly as she passed. It was all unfamiliar, and though her heart longed for her gardens and glowing skies, she knew there was no turning back. Adrian kept his distance at first. He did not demand her attention, nor force his presence. Instead, he allowed her time to walk through the palace and explore, always making sure she was safe, but never pressing too close. Sarah noticed this and wondered if it was intentional. She had expected him to act as if she was his possession, but instead he treated her as though she was a guest, free to move as she wished. In those early days, Solara observed him carefully. She had been told stories of his coldness, yet what she saw began to challenge those tales. Adrian would meet with his soldiers each morning, and though he was strict, he was never cruel. He listened to their concerns, gave clear instructions, and even offered words of encouragement when one of them looked nervous. His men respected him deeply, not because they feared him, but because he carried himself with fairness and strength. One afternoon, Solara passed through the training grounds where soldiers practiced. She stood quietly behind the balcony watching. Adrian was there sparring with 3 men at once. His movements were fast, controlled, almost like a dance, and his face remained calm even as wooden blades clashed around him. He defeated his opponents quickly, but when they stumbled, he did not mock them. Instead, he offered his hand to help them rise, and gave advice on how to improve. Sarah blinked in surprise. Was this the ruthless commander she had heard so much about that night? She thought about it while sitting by the fire in her chamber. The word ruthless kept echoing in her mind, but now it no longer seemed to fit the man she was seeing with her own eyes. There was strength in him, yes, and a sharpness in his gaze, but there was also patience, a quiet steadiness she had not expected. Adrian noticed her watching him more often, though she tried to hide it. One evening, during a quiet meal, he spoke to her directly. "You study me," he said simply, his voice neither accusing nor amused. Sel froze, caught off guard. "I wish to understand," she admitted softly. Adrian nodded. "That is fair. I hope you will judge me not by what you were told, but by what you see." His words lingered with her. She had never imagined he would care what she thought, but he did. It made her wonder even more who he truly was beneath the titles and stories. Over time, Solara began to see other sides of him. When a servant dropped a tray in the hall, she expected Adrian to scold the man harshly. Instead, Adrian bent down himself, helped gather the fallen dishes, and told the servant, "Be more careful next time," with a firm but calm tone. When he met with foreign guests, he spoke with respect, even to those weaker than him. And when Solara accidentally spilled ink while writing a letter home, he only smiled slightly and said, "It happens to everyone." His words were simple, but they held no mockery, only patience. One evening, Sarah joined him in the gardens of the human palace. They were smaller and less glowing than her own, but they carried a quiet beauty with roses climbing tall stone, arches, and fountains singing softly in the center. Adrian walked beside her in silence for a long while before finally speaking. "I know this is not the life you wished for," he said. Solara looked at him, startled. She had never expected him to admit such a thing. "No," she whispered honestly. "It is not." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the fountain. Nor was it my choice, but perhaps choice is not always given to people like us. Still, if we must walk this path, then I want it to be one of respect. I will not harm you, Solara. I will not cage you. Her breath caught in her throat. Those words pierced through her walls of fear, leaving her confused and strangely relieved. No one had spoken to her with such honesty since she left home. For a moment, she felt as if she could breathe again. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, very slowly, Sarah's fear began to soften. She still kept her guard high, but she found herself laughing quietly. One evening, when Adrian shared a small story about his childhood, he told her about getting lost in the woods as a boy, and how he had to climb a tree to find his way back. The image of a young, frightened Adrian stuck in a tree made her smile before she realized it, and Adrian noticed. "You laugh," he said, his tone gentle. Sarah touched her lips quickly, almost embarrassed. I didn't mean don't hide it," he said quietly. "It suits you." Her heart fluttered at those words, though she quickly looked away, unsure of what to feel. That night, Sarah sat by her window again, thinking of all she had seen and heard. She realized she no longer trembled every time she thought of Adrian. The stories that had haunted her for so long were beginning to crumble piece by piece, replaced by the truth she witnessed herself. Adrian was not ruthless in life. He was strong, disciplined, but also fair and unexpectedly gentle. For the first time since leaving her home, Solara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her life was not bound to misery. Perhaps the man beside her was not the monster she had imagined, but someone she could learn to understand. She did not know if love would ever bloom, but she knew this. The fear that had ruled her heart was no longer unshakable, and that time moved gently in the human palace, and with it, Princess Solar's fear continued to fade. The strange world that had once frightened her now felt less overwhelming, partly because of Adrian's presence, partly because she was learning to trust what she saw instead of what she had been told. Each day, she noticed more of his kindness, his fairness, and the quiet way he cared for those around him. The contrast between the stories she had grown up hearing and the reality before her eyes was almost unbelievable. One morning, she walked through the halls alone and found Adrian sitting in a small courtyard watching the sunrise. She hesitated at the threshold, unsure if she should approach. Yet, something inside urged her forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer. "You are quiet today," Adrian said without turning his voice calm. "I am thinking," Solara replied softly. "About what?" Solara paused. She wanted to speak honestly but feared the truth of her own feelings. Finally, she whispered about you. "About all I have feared and all I see now." Adrian turned to face her, his expression gentle. "And what do you see now?" "I see someone different from the stories," she admitted. "Not cruel, not ruthless. Strong, yes, disciplined, but fair and even kind. I did not expect this." A small smile touched his lips. "The world often tells us what to fear rather than what to know. You have seen me as I am, not as others imagined. That takes courage." Her chest tightened at his words. She had always been taught that humans were dangerous, that she should fear them. Yet here he was, not only harmless, but considerate, acknowledging her feelings without judgment. For the first time, she felt a sense of safety that went beyond mere protection. It was a warmth that touched her heart. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Adrian spent more time together, talking about their worlds, their histories, and the lives they had known. She learned of the struggles he had faced, the responsibility he bore to protect his people, and the sacrifices he had made for the good of others. She saw how his so-called ruthlessness in battle was born not from cruelty, but from a desire to defend those who could not defend themselves. Sarah found herself sharing small details about her own life as well. The gardens of her home, the music she loved, the stars she had watched as a child. Adrian listened attentively, asking questions with genuine interest. He never laughed at her stories, never dismissed her feelings, never acted as though she was less than him. In those moments, she felt a growing trust, a bond that quietly replaced her fear. One evening, As they walked together in the palace gardens, Adrian paused beside a small fountain. Water shimmered in the moonlight, casting reflections across their faces. He turned to Solara and said, "I know the journey here has been difficult for you. I cannot undo your fear, but I can promise that I will never make you feel small or powerless." Solara looked at him, her eyes wide. "You mean that?" she asked. "I do," he said simply. "I want our life together to be built on choice, respect, and understanding. Fear will never be a part of it." Her heart swelled at his words. The man she had dreaded meeting, the figure who had haunted her dreams with stories of cruelty, had become her protector, her companion, and slowly someone she admired. It was a feeling she could not yet name, but it was something new and precious. Days turned into months, and with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. Solara no longer flinched at his presence. Instead, she sought it. They would sit together, discussing politics, or walk through the palace halls, sharing small jokes and laughter. Adrian encouraged her opinions, valued her insight, and treated her as an equal partner in all matters. The stories that had once painted him as ruthless now seemed ridiculous compared to the man she knew in her own life. Sarah realized one night that she could remember the first time she had truly smiled in this new world. It had been when Adrian had recounted a small mistake he made as a child. The memory made her laugh quietly, and she had felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't known since leaving her home. It was then that she understood something important. Fear had lost its hold over her heart, replaced by admiration, respect, and the beginning of affection. One afternoon, while watching the sunset from a balcony, Solara admitted her feelings to herself for the first time. She liked him not just as a partner assigned by duty, but as a person, someone whose courage inspired her, whose kindness touched her, and whose patience allowed her to grow in ways she had not imagined. She had feared him for so long, and now she found herself drawn to him. Adrian, for his part, noticed the change in her. He could see it in her laughter, in the way she walked with confidence, and in the way her eyes no longer darted nervously whenever he approached. One evening he took her hand gently, not demanding anything, only offering a quiet connection. Solara felt warmth flood through her, a feeling of safety and belonging. In the quiet moments that followed, they spoke openly about their fears, their hopes, and their dreams. Solara told him about her childhood fears of humans, the stories that had shaped her perception, and the anxiety she had felt for so long. Adrian listened without interruption, without judgment, and when she finished, he said, "You faced your fear and saw the truth. That is more brave than anything I could ask of you." Those words stayed with her, echoing in her heart. She realized that love, real love, was not about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about trust, respect, and seeing each other fully without fear. And in that understanding, Solara felt her heart open completely. Their marriage, once a union of duty, had become a partnership of choice. They learned from each other, supported each other, and shared quiet moments that built a bond stronger than any story, stronger than fear, stronger than expectation. Solara looked at Adrian and finally saw the man behind the rumors, a human who was brave, compassionate, and deeply loyal. She had feared him for so long, and now she loved him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. In the end, Solara reflected on her journey from fear to trust, from stories to reality. She realized that the greatest lesson she had learned was that perception could be misleading, and courage was not only about facing danger, but also about opening one's heart. What had begun as a terrifying duty had become a life filled with warmth, respect, and love. She had faced the unknown and found that it held not monsters, but a man who could share her world, and in doing so had found happiness she never thought possible. The alien princess who had once trembled at the thought of marrying a so-called ruthless human now stood beside him, confident, respected, and loved. And in that partnership, two worlds found peace, not only through treaties, but through the understanding and bond of two hearts that had once been separated by fear, and now were united by trust